Awesome, man. First and foremost, thanks for taking the time. It's really a pleasure. I've been going almost on a binge episode of your content, your publications, and also your podcast appearances and all of that to try to study the topic as best as possible. So it's really a privilege, man. Thanks for taking the time again.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the kind words and for taking an interest in the research we do. So thanks again. And like I said, I'm happy to chat muscle as much as people will give me the opportunity.
How could I not, man? Because, well, just to dig right into the topic, because there's no time to waste when we're talking about getting stronger and getting bigger. One of the first things that caught my eye in your recent narrative review published is that right at the end, you guys had a little, like, it was 4 to 5 minute video. And that really caught my attention. Because I wanted to ask you, Derek, in your experience, how important is it for you to change your ways in regards to science communication? Because like this live stream, the podcast appearances you've done, and also the inclusion of that video, it really tells me something that science is being communicated in a different manner that, I don't know, let's say 20 years ago. And that actually having a presence on social media, even if we're not completely convinced about it, I think it's somewhat important to spread the word out. But I wanted to hear your opinion specifically on that little detail on the
Yeah,
video, which I love, man.
yeah. Thanks a lot. Actually, that was fun recording that in this office. Actually, but yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the problems we have with science and folks who are doing the research is actually translating and communicating that to the general population who's going to be consuming the information we put out, right? And there's a fine line between explaining what the science is showing, the concepts that we test here in the lab versus what's going on in the gym, right? It's completely different from the sterile lab environment versus the gym. But to communicate, like I said, the findings is such an important thing, and I think it's a huge limitation in our field. And my current supervisor, Stu Phillips, he always says, like we owe it to the general population to communicate our science because ultimately, I'm at McMaster University in Canada here, and it's a publicly funded institution. And so that means his salary, my salary, et cetera, is funded by taxpayers. And so yeah, we have an obligation, and I like to think about it as like a moral obligation to communicate our research and how it applies to the population. That ultimately where my research specifically is headed.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because actually, I do think it connects with the topic of muscle hypertrophy mechanisms, myths, misconceptions. Because I don't know, let's think in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm sure you're familiar with pumping iron and
Yes, of course.
his infamous quote about pumping like common. I think to
Yeah,
myself, if I was to watch that movie on those very same early years, well, that was the information that I had access to. So how the hell could I know that my training is being effective? Well, maybe by acute sensations in the gym, right? Which is to say, I think one of my hypotheses is that that's the reason why those myths still persist. And you get the work that you're doing along with Stu, which, man, it must be really cool to work with him. That's one of perhaps the reasons why we still talk about these things and also about hormones. Because what other explanation, if we're not familiar with the science being done, could we give to somebody, or how could we guide our training? So, what do you think about it? Do you think we have more of a cultural background because it's more of an applied science, or because of the science that was prior to all that we know right now?
yeah, yeah. It's certainly so. One of the things is when you look at other fields like philosophy. um, got the pump cover on right now. But yeah, when you look at the field in like exercise science, it's relatively in its infancy, right? Compared to things that have been around for hundreds of years. And you see this hypertrophy research is just like exponentially um, blew up over the last couple of decades. And, we're getting study after study that, um, in my opinion, uh, there's some room for improvement there in terms of study quality and less about quantity, but there is those are important things to consider when we make inferences from the literature, right? But that's also to say is that's how things progress, right? We develop hypotheses and we test these hypotheses by doing randomized control trials and testing interventions to see if that warrants further investigation. So if we have, a theory and we test this and it becomes certainly or more widely accepted, then basically those theories should be able to be replicated and hold up to scrutiny from various labs, right? And so all that to say is science continues to evolve and basically stuff that may have been once proposed doesn't hold up in the face of further studies and research, and essentially that's where we change our beliefs or hypothesis based off the data, right, that we get. And so um, that's kind of the biggest thing for me is like as a coach, as an athlete myself, as a researcher, you kind of have to synthesize your experience, all the weight of the evidence, but also you have to consider your client's goals and preferences and things like that to really, be a true evidence-based practitioner, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely, because that's what actually being evidence-based entails, right? Not just the scientific literature, but also your expertise as a coach and also the particular needs of a client, which often gets lost in translation in social media, right? It's either you're evidence-based or you are, I don't know, from old school training, Muscle Mag magazine and so on and so forth, right?
For sure, for sure. And I mean, it's one of the problems with social media and the short form content versus like a lengthy paper. Like the narrative review is quite so. When we talk about hierarchy of evidence, that's also the lowest kind of pull. I would put it kind of with the expert opinion and case reports, things like that. But I would argue, given the you know authors and the length of the research and both as being an applied field, that's again it's still on the lowest kind of pull of evidence. But all that to say is there's way more discussion in the paper than what I can provide in a 1 minute reel that's going to catch Instagram's attention, and that's why it's important that we have good, effective scientific communicators and folks like yourself who do a great job of communicating the science, but also representing it accurately and honestly, because that can get really you know, just because somebody links a PubMed ID doesn't mean anything. I've seen it countless times where folks have misrepresented literature or not even have read the literature. I've had this happen to me from a prominent social media figure who I won't name, but where they cited my research and it was the complete opposite of what our research found back when I was in New York. So um, yeah, it's a difficult thing for sure, but that's why I'm grateful for folks like yourself that give us researchers the opportunity to come on and talk science.
Likewise, man, I'm grateful for you guys that actually get the available time and disposition to talk about your work. To me, it's such a privilege. I'm like a kid in a candy store. For real, man.
Thank you.
You mentioned New York, and that got into my mind, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, actually. So one of the questions that I had to you, it really doesn't have to do with research. Is it really too much of a change of character between people in New York, which tends to be associated with, I don't know, being kind of rude, and in Canada, that tend to be associated with being super nice and kind? Or is it
Yeah,
just,
because I'm from one stoplight in the middle of like nowhere, Ontario, Canada. So I lived there like all my life and then moved to New York to do my master's with Brad. And big culture shock change, like just in terms of the business. But no, I met some really, really kind people in New York. Some of my best friends that I met, I had the privilege. Um, yeah, I met some really great people. No, I will say one of the things that's like the hustle and bustle. I found the city itself, like it seemed like to me that everybody was like in a hurry to be late. Like everybody was just like always rushing, and I'm like, man, I get it, but like. you just, I don't know. That was the only thing. But I loved my time there. It was a great, like, I can't wait to go back, honestly. It was an awesome city.
That's awesome. I'm sorry for the tangent, but I had to ask.
Yeah,
And also,
dear friends, Max. Hello, Max.
yeah,
You're an awesome guy to live with. And thank you,
yeah,
God.
of course.
Yeah, what a
Amen.
PhD will do to a man. Yeah, we'll get this shaved up maybe in the spring.
In a couple of years when it gets published and peer reviewed,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm currently right in the thick of things right now with data collection. I got about 15 more folks. So I just came from a participant right now, training in a training study for my dissertation to wrap up. So I'm right kind of either writing chapters or actively collecting data right now. So we're in the thick of things. Hence the beard.
I'm looking forward, man, and wish you the best of successes.
Thank you,
So
thank you.
please correct me if I'm wrong with the date, but I think it was 2010 that Brad published his now. I think it has a million sites or something like that. Citations, I'm sorry. Three mechanisms, which I think we all got it from there: mechanical tension,
Yeah,
metabolic
for sure.
stress, and muscle. Was it
Yeah,
2010? It's been a while, man. It's been a while,
22, 22.
and I think it's a great paper still. But well, you have worked with Brad. I think the man himself does not want to be that specific paper quoted cited anymore. But anyway, I think it's a good starting point to know where we're at. And also one of the papers that I think adds up to this line of research really, really well is oh shit man, I don't have the it's by Michael Roberts. And I think
Mike
he
Rivers,
theories
yeah,
also yeah man,
yeah,
that's a superb paper.
yeah. I got that one open. Actually, you know what? Look at this. I keep that thing here, man. That is like my
Yeah,
favorite paper of all
that's
time.
the one, man, and it's fucking
Yeah,
huge. That
yeah,
was
man.
long.
80 pages. Yeah, that one is. I like to call it like the definitive paper on muscle hypertrophy. That is, you get what I personally like to do when I kind of do literature reviews and either like write up a review paper or give my thesis students like background information is I do like to print things and or get the papers in chronological order to kind of better tell the story and how things have emerged. So you mentioned Dr. Schoenfeld's 2010 mechanisms of hypertrophy and their applications to resistance training paper. Fantastic paper. But as you said, he's like, hey, don't say that anymore. Things have updated, and I think that's the real um, you know, sign of a true scientist when they're like updating their things, updating their papers. So he has a really good paper from 2019 with Henny Walkenreich from Germany. And that one's called Stimuli and Sensors that Initiate Skeletal Muscle Hypertrophy Following Resistance Exercise. And that's a really good one. That's in Journal of Applied Physiology. That was published in 2019. There's a few others, but the Mike Roberts one, what I love about that one was published in American Physiological Society as a review in 2023. What's great about that one is it does that kind of history lesson for you. So that one, like I said, it's called Mechanisms of Mechanical Overload, Mechanical Skeletal Muscle Hypertrophy, Current Understanding and Future Directions. But there's a lot of stuff from the mechanisms dating back to like the 1890s. So you get a little bit of the history lesson and you get to see how these things evolved and how the research is still, there's a lot of exciting opportunities ahead for the future research directions.
Yeah, it's super cool because, like you mentioned, I think one of the first studies quoted on that one is in dogs, that they saw muscle growth in dogs. And the first intervention, resistance training intervention, specifically, it was, well, specific resistance training intervention was for soldiers, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1940s, World War II. So all that is to say is that it's fairly new, all these things about studying hypertrophy and also in the 80s, 90s, I think
Yeah, yeah,
muscle biopsies. So we're pretty much on that
yeah.
case,
So
man.
it's like a physician in the military, Thomas DeLorme, who basically they called it like heavy resistance exercise, and that was kind of the first work done in humans doing resistance training. So yeah, really cool stuff. And really what it was supposed to be more for like a restoration and like rehab purpose for the soldiers. So yeah, really cool work that's kind of came from from then, and then like you mentioned into the 60s, and now we're getting some really good stuff, in my opinion. Here, really getting at both applied aspects and some of the molecular, uh, underpinnings of stuff. So I think it's really going to continue to get at some cool questions and answers here soon.
Yeah, of course, and also alluding to your recently published narrative review, what drove you to explore that topic and in that specific type of scientific study? Perhaps not an RCT, a meta-analysis, a systematic review. Was it just out of love for the game, out of
Yeah,
curiosity? I don't know, man.
yeah. So that one, like I said, I work as a coach as well. So before I went back to graduate school to do my master's, I competed as a powerlifter. I coach powerlifters. I work as a nutrition coach, like personal trainer. Wolf and I own a gym here in Ontario, and just like a lot of myths still persist out there. And so my research is heavily, it's actually all my training studies is specifically with females. And so that's where the hormone section has come in, because I have a couple of papers on um, hormones and how they, in natural, uh, endogenous levels, they don't seem to have the correlation with hypertrophy outcomes. And so that was like the biggest one, and that one was particularly important for my work, as I've done. My colleague Alicia D'Souza and I, we did a chronic resistance training study with women manipulating volume around their menstrual cycle to take advantage of a quote unquote anabolic hormone with estrogen elevated. No difference over the course of three menstrual cycles. No effective hormone. And so that was part of it. And then just like as a coach, seeing folks continue to um, you know propose models and include things like metabolic stress and the pump as a part of their model uh, really was kind of the impetus for that. And then just coming across things with, like, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and if you're a bodybuilder, higher reps, you have swelling and edema, and it's sarcoplasmic, and it's not really contractile tissue, um, which, to be honest, is a gross misrepresentation of the literature, and particularly, like, and I think Dr. Roberts would agree, based off the work. I won't say the influencer, if that's what you want to call him, but he's certainly not a scientist. But when you cite the paper from Cody Hahn, and the graded weight is kind of this one end all be all study of, like, this is swelling and edema. Um, Again, kind of a gross misrepresentation in terms of, they took trained folks who were probably at, like, a closer to their genetic physiological ceiling, gave them a ton of volume that they were unaccustomed to. And so that could explain this disproportionate growth that they saw in the extreme responders that they reported, that, could be due to sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. But yet to be replicated. And in fact, again, we have better models now to assess hypertrophy. And even if sarcoplasmic hypertrophy does exist, it's probably more of like a spatial priming, so to speak, or in extreme cases where, like, we have rapid and robust growth, like anabolic steroids, or maybe with somebody that's at a ceiling and doing unaccustomed volumes, like I just mentioned, perhaps maybe creatine supplementation, where you have the introduction of water into the cell. All I have to say, uh, you know, when you look at things chronically, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy doesn't really need to be a huge adaptation. So, anyways, all this kind of sounds like a lot, and it was, but we kind of wanted to adjust some of the things that are still out there among folks, and what gets portrayed that we see as coaches and practitioners, and just being on social media, and it's the wild west out here. So there's lots of myths and things to dispel. But those are some of the ones that we thought were the most common, that were important to highlight.
Man, so many topics that I wanted to touch about. For instance, how to measure hypertrophy, the difference between sarcoplasmic and myofibrillar hypertrophy, so on and so forth. But I think a good middle ground that we can start with to go step by step is if you would have an athlete, a client, how would you define and explain both mechanical tension and mechanotransduction? Because people, you, myself included, used to assume that mechanical tension referred to the load being implied, being used. So you had to train heavier for more mechanical tension, and you had to train lighter for more metabolic stress. But that's not actually the case. So how would you define it? How would you explain it to someone
Yeah,
that it's not in the science department, let's say?
yeah. So first off, great question, because even in this review, like we one of the reviewers was like you can just keep mechanical tension and mechanotransduction in the same section, and I argued no, they're two different phenomena. First off, so mechanotransduction is essentially the biological conversion of mechanical tension into signaling the cascade for muscle growth, right? So that's a whole separate thing. And in particular, I'll circle back to that um, first. When we just talked about mechanical tension, right? That is literally what your fibers experience at the cellular level when you're lifting and contracting, right? So as they get closer and they get to fatigue and they slow up, and we have active or passive tension from contraction rather than being shortening or lengthening, but the muscle is contracting. At the fiber level, we have sensors that feel that tension. So when you lift weights, it doesn't have to be a lift or a weight, excuse me, it can be your body weight, machine, band. That's why we have utility and hypertrophy is such a forgiving adaptation because there's many roads still to roam, if you will, right? And so that's the first thing, right? So based off that, um, I guess in the most simplest way, it's just like contracting your muscle, right? Feel your muscles get to fatigue. And that's the first thing, right? So from there, right, you have the signaling cascade, which is the result of the forces on the fiber going, hey, body senses this signal, let's do something with it. And that is where we have a lot to kind of unravel, right? So again, with mechanical tension in and of itself, right, at the fiber level, we have mechanosensors, we'll call them, or what they are called, and that is things like focal adhesion kinases and complexes, and things like that. Titin seems to be it's the largest protein in the body, but that seems to be sensitive, particularly in lengthened contractions. Um, and so when you think about those processes, those seem to are responsible for this conversion and downstream cascades to things like mTOR, or the mechanistic or mammalian targeted rapamycin, which is essentially the largest signaling mechanism responsible for the translation of protein into uh, muscle. So basically, things get accrued into more what now we know is myofibrillogenesis, which is the addition of myofibrils in the cell that makes your up there. And we think about your muscles like this long spaghetti tube, right? And within the tube, we have like, so let's say spaghetti, it comes in the package, right? The big package. So that's your myofiber, right? And within that, you have all these myofibrils, right? And so basically, those increase in number, but the package itself doesn't. So as that package gets packed with the individual spaghetti noodles, it gets bigger as the package expands. And essentially, let's say your whole muscle is the box that they come in, right, on the shelf. That has to expand as well, but it doesn't actually increase in number. It's just the individual fibers, it seems. So the spaghetti noodles itself. Um, and so again, that's largely what we know. Somehow these mechanosensors stimulate mTOR or things like RPS6K kinase, and so like or P70S6K. So there's lots of different alphabet letter soup, but P70S6K is a pretty well known target signaling mechanism. But the point is, we are starting to learn that even independent of mTOR, there's other ways to stimulate growth, and we're still trying to figure out what they all are.
I'm gonna steal that spaghetti analogy if you allow me for my clients and for some students. I think it works just fine, man. And I think the complicated thing here, it's not really understanding that we need to train hard, but what also happens during those contractions, specifically, I don't know, let's say a set of 12 to 20 repetitions, when we're not dependent on oxidative glucolysis. I'm trying to translate it in my head from Spanish to English. All the things that happen, the hormonal fluctuations that also happen, that we used to assume that we're also directly causing hypertrophy, but that's not actually the case, right? Because in regards to hormones, again, circling back to hormones, I don't know where I read it, man, but I'm sure you heard about the myth that used to persist about doing heavy, specifically squats, so that your whole body could grow. I think it was Muscle Man. Don't quote me on that one, but I think I read it in Muscle Man. But that's not actually the case because, like you mentioned, mechanical overload is site specific, right? If that was to be the case, hormones, then our whole body or biceps would grow bigger by doing squats, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's like literally, like I was on the bodybuilding.com forums when I was in high school. Like, I I did like John Bros, Bulgarian, Corey Gregory squat every day. I squatted for like over 300 days straight. Um, and part of that was like, yeah, you do some heavy legs and your testosterone peaks, and then your bench is going to go up, your arms are going to get huge. Now my squat got significantly stronger. Like I think I first started it at like 360 or 160 kilos and ended up squatting like 230 kilos. So that was cool. But my bench didn't really go up much, and my gains in my arms really didn't either. And really, my legs got bigger as a result, but really, I wasn't pushing a lot of volume either, just like working up to a heavy max. So I think that's important to acknowledge. It's an N equals one anecdote, of course, but like strength and competing in the powerlifter will be the first thing. Strength is very specific. It's a skill. You practice the skill, you get better. Now, hypertrophy is, in my opinion, which is also a big question. That's not much contention in the literature. Hypertrophy, in my opinion, is contributory to strength gains. That I don't argue. But strength still is specific to, and that's like the guiding principle in strength training programming, as you know, as a coach, right? And an athlete yourself. You want to get strong, you got to practice what you want to get strong in, or as strong as possible, anyway. So you want to get jacked, there's many ways to do that. But all I have to say is, yeah, my my squat went up as a practice effect, and I, obviously added some muscle tissue, but my bench lagged behind significantly because I wasn't benching every day, and I didn't have a whole lot of muscle mass. I certainly didn't gain it from squatting. I can tell you that.
And it's really interesting how the potential implications of this understanding or whatever it is that can do to a training program, right? And can also significantly increase perhaps or decrease the adaptation response. Because, well, if you want to be strong, it can be more specific. But if you want to get bigger, well, hypertrophy training itself is not really specific in regards to performance. So that gets a little bit trickier because, okay, how am I going to gauge if I'm actually growing bigger if I do not have access to ultrasound, to muscle biopsies? Well, circling back, the pump, right? I'm feeling it. I can feel the muscle contraction. I can feel the skin is about to burst, to quote Arnold on that one.
Yeah.
So perhaps this contributes to the confusion, man. Can we dig a little bit deeper into muscle swelling? What actually is? What is the purpose of the swelling? And does it have an impact, a longitudinal impact on hypertrophy?
Yeah. So, great question. I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is that um, a lot of times the pump and self swelling are used interchangeably, and so I've said this a few times. I'm not sure if that is the most correct stance on that. So if we think about um, the pump, it is like you mentioned, it is your subjective perception of that cellular swelling. And to be honest, they may turn out to be the same thing, but really, as far as I'm concerned, nobody's sought out to determine or investigate that. And there's a few reasons. I can talk about study design and why it's super difficult to do that. But really, like ultimately, like you yourself are not an ultrasound. So your perception of the swelling that you feel during an exercise doesn't necessarily indicate that that will also be in line with what we detect actually at the muscular level via ultrasound or however. So that's the first thing, right? I'm not sure if the self swelling and the pump should be used interchangeably, but nevertheless, the thought is, right, so when we lift weights, we do provide an occlusion to the musculature, right, to deliver oxygenated blood. So the arteries are bringing blood into the muscle and the veins are getting deoxygenated blood out. But what happens is as we contract, it becomes more of an occlusion effect to as you contract your blood or your muscle. So blood starts to pool in. So then we have an increase uh, in plasma, which basically gives us this acute alteration, I guess, or change. It's very transient change in extracellular and intracellular water and plasma. So that's why you feel the skin tighten up, right? Feels great. I'm a bodybuilder. I love this stuff. I use BFR training to get a pump. I'm a power lifter. Use it for low loads, lots of utility. Use low load training all the time. But again, first thing is the pump is transient from that increase in blood flow. So it's a byproduct of the compression reducing blood away from the arteries, right? Or um, from the musculature. So uh, essentially, in like the scientific term, you just have like pressure gradient, if you will, that draws even more plasma back into the muscle. And so somebody calling. Thought I had my phone on do not disturb, but yeah, so
Don't worry,
um,
man.
uh, so basically, this pump or swelling, what it's thought to be, this increased pressure within the cell, leading to the cellular membrane or the sarcolemma and or your cytoskeleton, which we can get into deeper. That's essentially the structural network of like your uh, mechanical integrity, like the sarcomeres, if you will, so the smallest unit of muscle. So if you think about the spaghetti noodle, uh, what actually shortens them in length is the smallest unit, which is the sarcomere, which is composed of those small proteins, actin, myosin, etc. Anyways, the thought is when you have this swelling, it's a threat, and the body senses this as a threat, and then initiates further signaling to promote adaptation, so i.e. growth. Um, there really isn't a lot of good evidence for that. And the other part that folks will think is maybe this increase in swelling also could promote increases in satellite cell activity and thus like thermonuclei, which is also important for regulating adaptations in hypertrophy. Again, no evidence on that. It's just speculative at this point. Um, in the literature, what we do have, uh, we have one like acute study that assessed like short-term swelling, and it had a what I would call like a weak correlation with adaptations following 6 weeks of leg extensions. Um, and basically, all I have to say is when you um, look at it, that is more. This is where like the science communication and like the actual practitioner stuff comes into play because the pump is not itself a mechanism of hypertrophy. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm saying don't go get a pump. That is like the opposite, right? And that's why I was very meticulous with the writing and saying like, hey, if you enjoy the pump, it allows you to adhere to your program, great. But there's a lot of times where people aren't getting a pump and they're not perceiving a pump, and so therefore they think an exercise may be bad. Now, there's so many reasons that we can get into that, but um, all that to say is like you can, do a heavy, like I got to do a heavy set of like 5 to 6 squats today. I won't be feeling a pump in my quads. Guess what's extending my knee? My quads, right? I'll probably have a pump in my face from the blood pressure, but, you know, if I then were to think squats may be a bad exercise because I'm not getting a pump in my quads, that's not great, right? So that's the first thing, right? Like depending on the repetition range, that's already one thing there. Now you could have differences in hydration status, right? So let's say I'm going to go do sets of 15 to 20 leg extensions, and I've had a pizza and a bunch of sodium before. I'll have no problem getting a pump. If I'm like yourself, post show, low on glycogen, just got done your season. Well, let's say you're a week out from a show, right? So you're really in the thick of things. You're probably going to do 3 or 4 sets just to protect your muscle tissue, but you're not going to feel a pump. I remember the week out from a show, and getting a pump was like what, So does that mean like the training itself isn't stimulative? No, of course not, right? So there's a few factors there, right? Um, Again, because muscle uh, has this occlusion effect, folks with smaller musculature may not perceive a pump. So if I think of some of the females that I've trained over the years or coach, there's plenty of times on average, so again, on average, males have more muscle than females. Sometimes females will not perceive a pump on a given exercise, and it could be just due to that exercise and the musculature available is not allowing them to perceive it. And so, does that mean X is a bad exercise? Of course not. But that's where you can start to work and communicate, and that's where coaching one-on-one comes in to say, hey, we can maybe use this as a proxy, right? Are you perceiving a pump on this exercise? Okay, if not, maybe we can swap to a better exercise. But again, it's all context dependent. Um, and so I guess like that's the biggest thing. There's an applied aspect of it. But for those that were designing a program and training programs and exercises based off the perception of a pump, I think is misguided and not supported in the literature. And as far as I'm concerned, I personally wouldn't recommend it as at least as a go-to program design.
I love it, man, how you put it. Because yeah, I can recall those last weeks before my competitions. I couldn't feel anything, man. All I felt was pain, hunger, and I wasn't even sweating, man. I don't know. It was like this warmth in my face, but no pump to be experienced
Yeah,
in months.
yeah. You look
So,
you look awesome. Was that your first? Was that your
appreciate
first
it.
season? Was that
My
your first?
second
Second.
competitive
Nice.
season.
Nice.
Yeah, so I
Okay.
got the pro card, and I'm hoping to give it.
Congratulations.
Thanks a lot, man. Means a lot.
That's
And
awesome.
I'm hoping I can give it perhaps a year in the off season, grow a little bit, and see how we do, man. See if there's any future in this bodybuilding game. Which same to you, man. I looked at the photo you sent me for the promo. Man, you look insane. I also saw your posting videos, etc. You have on your feed. Insane, man. Insane. It's really crazy to see the natural level that is
Thank you.
present
Yeah.
nowadays. Kudos on
Yeah.
that, man.
Thank you. So, yeah, congrats on the program. I mean, it's an incredible accomplishment. It's certainly near the end, it can be a pretty lonely endeavor, right? When you're out getting your steps in, you're up early to train, etc. Um, but yeah, like when you're that lean, getting a pump, like if you're gonna again make inferences from your exercise selection, you're in no condition to stimulate growth. But I mean, there's so many reasons why you're not going to be adding tissue in the of the state, but protecting and preserving tissue because you are getting a signaling cascade from training close to fatigue, right? Um, I think that's the most important thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, what were your pump like post show when you have your refeed post sodium, etc. Right? Like, I'm sure things are mature for you now.
I started to smile again, man. I started to say hi to people in the gym. I started to feel like a human being again. I kid you
Yeah,
not, man. It's not because I'm trying to be an asshole. Perhaps I was an asshole. I'm sorry to everybody out there that got me in my worst of times. But I used to hide from people so that I would not have to have
yeah,
conversations and just focus on the training, go home, and keep going with the day, right? But that actually, it's a really great segue, man, because one of the other things that I wanted to discuss with you, to be respectful of your time, obviously, it's actually the role of nutrition and how this, in a priori, seems like it's just theoretical, that it lacks practical applications, all this mechanical, mechanical transduction, etc. I think it's super practical because if you understand what's the role of training, whether you're in the off season, in a contest prep, or you're just a recreational athlete trying to get leaner, the decisions that you can make based on this knowledge that, okay, it's okay if I don't have a pump, but it's okay if sometimes in some exercises having chasing a pump can help adherence. That's perfectly fine. But it's not to say that you have to be scared because of the lack of a pump, to put it that way. And that also, when you are low in energy, to have a clear mind on what's the role of training so you make better decisions. I think it's super practical, man. I don't know if this research that you've done, this understanding that you nowadays have, has helped you both as an athlete and as a coach.
Mm.
I think I lost the audio a little bit, man.
Uh,
Ah, there you go. Can hear you.
yeah, are we good? Yeah, sorry.
Nah, don't
My
worry, man.
my timer for the day. I have my social media
I do have
turned off.
the,
There you go.
I have the
And
two, man. Don't worry, don't sweat
yeah,
it.
yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the question is just like more about the role of nutrition that I've kind of come across as an athlete and researcher.
Yeah, sure. Understanding how, what is the purpose of training when you're trying to hold on to muscle or create new
Yeah.
tissue, and the role, the permissive or inhibitory role of nutrition.
Yeah, yeah. So you just mentioned like nutrition certainly a permissive role, as you mentioned. So when we are, uh, like thick of off season, if you will, I gotta start getting into my pre-diet, pre-prep phase here very soon because I'm gonna get back on the stage in 2027. So I'm sitting about 200, 205 right now. My stage weight was about 170-ish, 168, 169, depending on the shift.
Right.
But that's the goal is kind of hopefully, come back a little bit bigger. So there's a few things, right? I stole this analogy from Stu. As much as I love to pretend it was my own, unfortunately, it's not. But if you think about it like this, so protein is the bricks, right? Those are the amino acids that build and promote accretion of more muscle tissue, right? They are important, but lifting and weight training, resistance training, going to the gym, picking up weights, training hard, those are the construction workers and the bricklayers that are actually putting the bricks together and making the building, right? So you can have all the bricks dropped off in the world, but if you have nothing there to stimulate or serve the purpose to build the structure, you're not going to have it. And so I love protein. I'm in the protein metabolism research lab. Actually, let me show you this. This is all of our protein for our study just came in the last
Oh,
couple of
man,
days.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Right. So we supply our participants with protein to be a permissive role and aid in muscle growth. But
Right.
by and large, protein's effects on lean mass and muscle are small, right? 90, I would say probably 95% of adaptations are from going to the gym and lifting weights. Protein, very important for that, like providing the amino acids again and signaling for further growth. And so the maximize adaptations certainly going to help. So my favorite quote is protein is necessary and sufficient to maximize resistance training adaptation, but the effect is small. By and large, like full stop there. So there's that aspect, right? Particularly when we're off season and we are full of, body or higher in body fat and fuller right now, of course, than when we are 1 week out from a show, sub 10% body fat. When we are in a body of or an energy state of maintenance or surplus, it's very easy for the body to use energy elsewhere. It's going to use our glycogen stores. It's going to use our fat stores. When we get leaner and the body needs energy, it's going to break down amino acids if the energy available is not there. And that's where I think increasing your protein intake in conjunction with resistance exercise becomes even more important, right? So that's why increasing your energy from protein becomes more important because the body's going to take amino acids if it doesn't have energy from your body fat or carbohydrate stores, right? So that's where it gets really important in my opinion. But again, the most protective thing you can do to hold on to your lean tissue is getting to the gym and get a stimulus. Train your musculature close to fatigue so it continues the body realizes, hey, this is like because ultimately what exercise is it's a threat to our survival, right? And we create adaptations to as an adaptation to those threats and those stressors, right? And so as we get leaner and leaner, body's running out of amino acids. We train so the body goes, oh, I need this musculature because this threat is coming, right? And so I need to adapt. So I actually shouldn't use this amino acid. I need to save it. And that's why it's important that the magnitude in, in a deficit isn't too large so that we have the energy available needed, right? And that it's not too small either because obviously we want to lose some fat so that we can get absolutely peeled on stage, right? So there's uh, you know, differences and that's my stance on it. I know some folks will go back and forth of whether bulking is required for maximizing growth, which I mean again is an important they're certainly right in terms of like muscle building as a signaling process. So you train and you provide it with the nutrients available, and gaining extra fat is not necessary, which I would agree with. I just also like to be strong, and a little bit extra fat helps my joints feel good, and I feel like I said. I know what it takes to get down there, and I'm sure some of those people do as well. Some of them certainly don't, I can tell you that. So, as a person who's been down there, and I'm sure you can appreciate that, I know what it takes, so I like to have both rings, if you will, and can comment on both, right? So, that's where I'm at on it.
Yeah, it's like I used to not really give too much of a shit if I gain too much fat prior to competing, but now that I actually know how long it takes and how difficult it can be, my mindset has shifted a little bit from okay, let's tease this improvement season, but let's not get too crazy about it. I'm
Yeah,
sure everybody likes to eat, man, but at the end of the day, if you want to take the bodybuilding sport as a sport itself seriously, I think it's just one of the things you have to embrace and accept. One final question, man, because again, I want to be respectful of your time
yeah,
and your upcoming training session. If we're not in a laboratory setting, for your athletes, for you as an athlete, how can you measure or perhaps standardize progressive overload, which we know it's not the same as overloading as training hard. It's the when you notice that your performance is going going up. How can we measure this? And what progression strategies do you like to employ?
yeah, yeah. Coach from 3D Brian Meyer.
Oh, lots
He's
of them.
yeah, with him and I have been working together for like I was gonna say 4 years, but it's 2026 now. We started about 5 years now, so that's exciting. Great guy, really smart guy, and he's got a really good article on JPS education, and it's basically like the utility for an auto-regulated dynamic double progression model. And so I really like to use that. So because like I said, hypertrophy is very forgiving. There's many ways we can do this, right? So the first thing we can do is we can take an exercise and we can progress it in either reps, load, or a reduction in repetition and reserve or relative effort, right? So there's a few ways when we progress, like I might take an exercise, for instance. So and this is more thinking longitudinally, and this works how I have even the powerlifting athletes track their accessory work because ultimately what we'll do is okay. Let's start with squats. Okay, I want you doing 6 to 10 rep range, maintaining 2 to 3 reps in reserve, right? So we're getting pretty heavy, getting close to failure, but because it's a squat compound movement, etc., we don't need to push close to fatigue, right? Or as close, right? Um, Work up. Maybe we get up to let's say 405 for a set of 10. Can you match that on the second set? Great. Can you match it on the third? No, I was only able to get 6 reps, 3 reps in reserve. Okay, there's the progression right there. Next week, we're going to go 10, 10, maybe 7 reps, add a rep, maybe it's 8 reps, right? Eventually, you can do, let's say we get up to 10 for those 3 sets, and the relative reps in reserve stays the same 2 to 3 reps in the tank, 2 to 3 reps in the tank, 2 to 3 reps in the tank, right? It's a long time to actually get there. And then you can say, okay, let's match it 2 weeks in a row. Okay, sweet. Did it 2 weeks in a row. Now we're ready to increase load. So maybe instead of 405, we go 410 or 415. Maybe you do that for a set of 6. Okay, 2 to 3 reps. Can you do it? No, I got 5. Okay, you're out of the rep range. Let's lower load back to 405. We rip it for 10. And again, many ways to measure that performance, but that's how I like to do it because that can keep you engaged both from, okay, I had a load this week, let's match reps, and oh, I matched load and RPE came down, sick. Like lots of ways you can, skin a cat, if you will. And so I think that um, keeps things interesting. It keeps things fun. And again, you can always swap out exercises and stuff as well. And so when you're in this, and like I wrote in our paper, like when you view it in the lens of months and years and not days and weeks, and really enjoy and embrace the process, then it's going to be so much uh, funner, I guess, so much more fun than just thinking about the outcomes, right? As you know, if we think about it from like a bodybuilding perspective, right? You didn't just think about yourself on stage, right? You get into the process, you get your tracking, your stuff, you get your food weight, you get your train. Like you need to really enjoy the process and embrace that as opposed to the outcome. Like I said, congrats on the pro card, but I'm sure that wasn't what you were thinking about to get there, right? It was the ability to what can you do process to get there. And uh, again, for me, I would be the last. I would train if I was the last person on earth because I love it, man. Like I love this stuff. Like my whole life is dedicated to putting stuff up and putting it back down. So yeah, like again, yeah, reps, sets is another prox. Like you can add volume, of course, but yeah, for me, in terms of performance, like we pick a training cycle. Here are the exercises. Right, like like I said, I'm gonna go squat right now. I had the flu a couple weeks ago that brought my all time performance down. Like I use the squat as a real life example because that's literally what I'm doing. Like I worked up to 405 for 3 sets of 10. That's like I never did that before, even when I was powerlifting. So um, working that back up now, right? So I'm hoping to do that. But yeah, like I said, reps, RP reductions or reps in reserve increases, if you will, and then load, of course. So all of those, you put them together and you can have one heck of a fun time.
Uh, it's funny, man. I actually had a conversation with Brian a while back. I think it was when they just published their response to the volume progression to Mikey Bolton's model and all that. Yeah, it blew my mind back in the day, and still, I actually do apply. Sorry. Oh yeah, because he put it so elegantly, man. I went like, oh, this guy's blowing my mind, and having the discussion with him. To this day, I actually train in that very same manner with the dynamic double progression, which keeps it fun, keeps it interesting. We know that perhaps strength increases are not really 100% explanatory of muscle size increases, but who cares, man? If you're getting stronger, if you're absorbing this progressive overload, well, you're on the right track. And I think that's something that also people get lost in translation. They think that science is opposed to just training hard, which is really the contrary. And science is telling you, you need to train hard, not for a week, not like you mentioned, not for a week, but for months, for years. If you want to one of the final things that I think it's really interesting that you included in your review, it's the muscle gain potential that we have
Mm.
to have more on the ground expectations, but not to cut us off, just to tell us, well, this is what we know, this is what we're not sure of, but what do you need to do in the gym is to
Yeah,
go hard every day, go hard every week, every month, every year, be patient, and most importantly, enjoy the process, right?
yeah, exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's the thing. Like so there's a couple things. When you talk about like long-term modeling with muscle growth and maximum potential, there's some nobody has a great idea, at least in the literature, of what that looks like. Okay, so above about a 25 for the free mass index is usually where we see folks kind of above that we start to look at into performance enhancing drugs. That's not to say you can get this. I'm not, but you know, um, people can. There is people out there. There's, you know, genetic outliers, etc. People just built for this, if you will. The other part I think is important, like because muscle growth flattens out, that wasn't meant to discourage like bodybuilders and like it's not like a hate piece. Like I'm a natural bodybuilder. I'm trying to put on as much muscle as possible too. I'm right there with you guys. What it is to show people, look, 1 in 5 people lift weights. They go to the gym and strength train. And I bet you that number, because those data are self-report, I bet you that data is closer to 1 in 10. As a gym owner, and I think about the people from my community that actually attend my gym and or go elsewhere, right? Like that number's, it's probably lower than that. So that's the first thing. Like that's the nut we got to crack here, in my opinion. Is get more people resistance training. There's so many benefits from it. So when we weight train and you begin and you get those quote unquote knee regains, it happens very fast. And that's a good thing. That means the majority of your adaptations that you're going to get out of you are going to occur within like the first 1 to 2 years. I don't think that's anything to be upset about, right? It's still like, hey, you can train hard and you can still get those gains. And that's where you can get into those, fringes, if you will, of like looking at like, creatine supplementation and the higher end of protein intake and messing around with, advanced training techniques like partials and all that good stuff that everybody loves. Adding higher end of volume, specialization cycle, all that stuff that we mess around with, right? But by and large, the majority of the general population just need to understand, like, hey, show up, train hard, couple times a week, progress, focus on like we talk about in our volume or our paper, sufficient volume, getting close proximity to failure, and all that stuff that we talk about. Because that's like where the majority of the gains are. And as you, I'm sure, would agree with, that's where the majority of it is still lies with us. Is like going and just doing the thing over and over and over again. And, there's no sexy answers. Like I came and I did a PhD. Most people come to like discover science and discover cool things and be like this revolutionary scientist. Whereas I came at it from the lens of like, I really want to dispel some of these myths. I don't see this and I don't see a physiological rationale for why. And so that's where I'm kind of, and my whole purpose is like the first conversation I ever had with Stu was, what can we do to get more people lifting? And I'm hoping that my research continues to shine light on that and make it more inclusive for people because ultimately the heaviest weight often is the front door and getting into the gym is by and large where you're going to see a lot of adaptations. So anyways, I rambled there, but I hope you hung around for the ride.
I totally agree. And not also the front door, but also well, if your gym has stairs to go to the weight room, when you're in contest prep, man, those are the toughest. I used to have to just mentally prepare myself to go upstairs and train. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
You
so
look insane again.
in May. And so when I prepped, she was about 2.5. And I remember my latest I ever was right after depleted, but prior to a peak week for my second show. And again, my stage weight for that show was 169, fully peaked. I woke up that morning, Sunday morning, the week before, 164 pounds. And I said to my wife, it felt like I had cinder blocks on my arms and legs. And I was like stapled to the bed. And I said that to my wife, and Erica, I love her dearly. She's very supportive, and like she's the best, man. Like couldn't ask for a better partner. In all the silly hobbies and education stuff. But anyways, she said to me, she goes, "Well, it's a good thing you're strong because your daughter wants to go to the park with daddy." So I was like, "Yeah, no choice." So you know, took her to the park, put her in the stroller. We went to the long park, so I was able to get my steps, man. But I was dragging my feet.
You're you're next level, man. Being a father, completing a PhD, doing research, and, and also competing in bodybuilding. We can laugh about it now, man. It's for real. We can laugh about it right now, but in the moment, it does feel like that itself is stirring you right back into the soul, man. But anyway, Derek, I think that's it for this conversation. It's really, man. Time flew by for me. I hope for you too. It's been super interesting. I have nothing but gratitude towards you, towards the work that you do with Stu, the work that you've done with Brad, and also your upcoming PhD dissertation. I'm really looking forward for reading that because I think it's gonna help a lot of folk, a lot of female folk out there, hopefully. So anyway, man, I'll be on the lookout for that. I don't want to take any more of your time, so
Yeah,
really been a pleasure, man.
appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate you reaching out to us and giving me a little bit. Happy to do it in the future, man. It was a pleasure and thank you for having me.
Oh, I'd love to, man. So I hope you have a great training session. If you
Thank
upload
you.
it to your stories, I'll be rooting for your squad. So best of luck, man.
Thank you.
Have a great day, man.